The only thing you are qualified to write in my law firm is a damn receipt for a burrito. Leave this defense brief on my desk, take your termination papers, and get the hell back to whatever slum you crawled out of. Look at this guy. Screaming his lungs out in a custom $5,000 Italian suit. Veins literally popping on his forehead, genuinely believing he is the absolute king of the universe. And look at the girl standing right in front of him. Her head is bowed. Her hands are gripping a cheap cardboard box filled with her meager office belongings, and she is silently taking every single drop of his toxic, classist abuse. Have you ever poured your absolute soul into a job, sacrificing your sleep, your health, and your sanity, only to have some lazy, arrogant boss steal all your credit and throw you out like garbage? If you have ever swallowed that bitter pill of workplace injustice, drop a comment down below right now, because this story is going to hit way too close to home. But here is the secret about this specific girl. She is not looking down because she is crying or broken. She is looking down to hide a very cold, very calculated, and deeply terrifying smile. Because what this millionaire senior partner does not know is that by kicking her out today, he just signed his own professional death warrant. Let me take you back, exactly 3 days before this explosive confrontation. The clock on the wall of the 45th floor of Pearson and Ward corporate law firm ticked past 3 in the morning. The rest of the city was dead asleep, wrapped in the quiet comfort of a cold Tuesday night. But inside the associate bullpen, the fluorescent lights were buzzing relentlessly like a swarm of angry hornets. Elena sat hunched over her double monitors, her eyes completely bloodshot, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a frantic, desperate rhythm. She was a first-generation Hispanic American, and she carried the crushing weight of her entire family's generational sacrifices on her tired shoulders. She did not have a multi-million-dollar trust fund to fall back on. She did not have a wealthy father who spent his weekends playing golf with federal judges. She only had her brilliant, razor-sharp legal mind, and a relentless work ethic that secretly terrified everyone around her. For the past 72 hours, Elena had not slept a wink. She had survived purely on stale vending machine coffee and sheer willpower. She was desperately trying to clean up a catastrophic legal mess, created by none other than Richard, the firm's golden boy and senior partner. Richard was supposed to be leading the defense for a massive, high-stakes intellectual property lawsuit for a billionaire tech client. But Richard had not looked at a single page of the case files in over a month. Instead, he spent his afternoons at exclusive country clubs, sipping expensive scotch, and leaving the actual grueling, brain-melting legal research to his so-called inferior assistant. Elena did not just fix his mistakes. She completely dismantled the opposing counsel's arguments and built an impenetrable fortress of legal defense from scratch. She found a brilliant, deeply hidden loophole in the federal statutes that would absolutely guarantee a victory for their billionaire client. She poured her blood, sweat, and tears into a 90-page defense brief that was nothing short of a masterpiece. It was the kind of work that makes careers and earns partnerships overnight. Exhausted, but incredibly proud, she saved the document on the firm's shared server and finally rested her head on her desk for a few hours of sleep. When she woke up the next morning, the nightmare began. Elena walked into Richard's lavish, glass-walled corner office to discuss the final revisions for the upcoming trial. She saw a freshly printed copy of her 90-page brief sitting on his massive mahogany desk. But as she looked closer, her heart instantly dropped into her stomach. The title page had been completely altered. Her name was gone, erased, deleted, R12, wiped completely out of existence. In its place, printed in bold, arrogant letters, was the name Richard Sterling, lead defense attorney. She confronted him immediately, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a deep, boiling sense of betrayal. Richard did not even have the decency to look guilty. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, steepled his fingers, and stared at her with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. He told her that an assistant like her had no right to share a byline with a named partner. He mocked her accent, sneered at her community college background, and told her that she should be grateful he even allowed her to be in the same room as his wealthy clients. When Elena threatened to report him to the firm's managing partners, Richard's arrogant smirk twisted into a mask of pure malice. He did not just take her name off the document. He pulled a termination letter out of his drawer. Citing her for poor attitude, insubordination, and a severe lack of professionalism, he fired her on the spot, stealing her masterpiece and kicking her to the curb just 48 hours before the biggest trial of his career. He stood up, towering over her, and delivered that sickening, racist insult about returning to the slums. He thought he had completely crushed her spirit. He thought he was untouchable, but as Elena packed her cheap cardboard box and walked out of those glass doors for the last time, she did not shed a single tear. She knew something that arrogant fool did not. She knew that a thief who steals a weapon without reading the manual is bound to shoot himself in the foot. And Richard was about to pull the trigger in front of a federal judge. You see, Elena did not just pack her bags and cry all the way home. Instead, as she was putting her cheap coffee mug into that cardboard box, she made a very conscious, very dangerous decision. She knew Richard's ego better than anyone in that building. She knew that he was so spectacularly lazy, so blinded by his own arrogance, that he would never actually read the 90-page document she had written. He would just slap his name on the cover, print it out on expensive cardstock, and present it to the judge like it was his own genius creation. So, before she hit save for the final time, Elena planted a landmine. Deep inside the document, buried exactly on page 42, she wove in a highly complex, incredibly obscure legal argument regarding the ABA model rules of professional conduct and a very specific work-for-hire intellectual property clause. It was a brilliant argument, but it required a deep, fundamental understanding of legal mechanics to defend if questioned. If you did not write it, if you did not understand the intricate web of citations holding it together, it was a death trap. Many people would choose to walk away and just accept the injustice. But the truly relentless ones know how to use their minds to completely flip the board. Which type of person are you? Drop a comment and let me know. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you stand with the underdogs who refuse to surrender to the elite. Now, fast forward to the morning of the trial. Richard was practically floating on air. The night before, he had taken his billionaire tech client to a $5,000 dinner at a Michelin-star steakhouse, laughing, drinking expensive champagne, and guaranteeing an absolute victory. He walked into the federal courthouse that morning wearing a custom-tailored suit, his chest puffed out, acting like he owned the entire justice system. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, junior associates, and high-profile executives filled the wooden benches, all waiting to see the great Richard Sterling perform his magic. Judge Hawthorne, a notoriously strict and sharp-minded federal judge, called the court to order. Richard stood up, buttoned his suit jacket with a slick, practiced motion, and approached the podium. He was smooth, charismatic, and incredibly persuasive. For the first 20 minutes, he had the entire courtroom eating out of the palm of his hand as he delivered the opening statements that Elena had painstakingly written for him. He spoke with such artificial passion, looking back at his billionaire client with a smug, self-satisfied grin. He was dominating the room. But then, it was time to submit the primary defense brief into the official court record. Richard confidently handed the thick, leather-bound document to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge's bench. "Your Honor," Richard proclaimed, his voice echoing through the silent room, "I have personally authored a comprehensive defense brief that absolutely dismantles the plaintiff's ridiculous claims, layer by layer." Judge Hawthorne put on his reading glasses and flipped open the document. The courtroom was dead silent. The judge's eyes scanned the first few pages, and then he paused. He flipped deeper into the document. He stopped exactly on page 42. Judge Hawthorne frowned, a look of intense legal curiosity crossing his face. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice cutting through the tension, "this is a remarkably aggressive interpretation of the intellectual property statutes you've outlined here on page 42. Richard smiled, completely clueless. "Thank you, Your Honor. I spent weeks perfecting that specific angle." "Fascinating," Judge Hawthorne replied, not looking up. "However, the citation structure here is quite unusual. It intertwines with the ABA model rules in a way I have rarely seen. I would like my senior clerk to read this specific clause aloud for the record before we proceed." Richard's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered. "Of course, Your Honor." Judge Hawthorne turned his head slightly toward the shadows on the left side of his elevated bench. Madam Clerk, if you would please read the highlighted section. A figure stepped forward from the quiet, dimly lit corner of the judicial bench. She was wearing a pristine, authoritative black robe over a sharp, professional suit. She held the official court copy of the brief in her hands. As she stepped into the harsh, fluorescent light of the courtroom, she slowly reached up and took off her reading glasses. She looked down at the podium, her dark eyes locking directly onto Richard's face, with the intensity of a sniper looking through a scope. Richard's breath hitched in his throat. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a $5,000 suit. His hands gripped the edges of the wooden podium so hard his knuckles turned completely white. The woman standing up there, holding the absolute power of the federal court in her hands, the highly esteemed senior clerk to Judge Hawthorne, was Elena. The entire courtroom seemed to freeze in time. You could literally hear the hum of the air conditioning vents and the faint ticking of the wooden clock on the wall. Richard stood at the podium, completely paralyzed, staring at the woman he had brutally fired and humiliated just 48 hours ago. Elena did not gloat. She did not smirk. She maintained an expression of absolute, terrifying professionalism as she adjusted the microphone in front of her. Mr. Sterling. Elena's voice echoed through the silent courtroom, clear, steady, and razor-sharp. Page 42 of your submitted brief references a highly unconventional defense strategy. She looked down at the document, then back up at him, her dark eyes piercing right through his expensive suit. You are attempting to bypass the plaintiff's patent claims by invoking a very obscure interpretation of the work-for-hire doctrine, specifically tying it to a precedent set in the 1998 appellate ruling of Vance v. Tech Corp. Richard swallowed hard. The microphone on his podium picked up the dry, clicking sound in his throat. However, Elena continued, stepping right into the trap she had meticulously built for him. That specific ruling was partially overturned 3 years ago by the Supreme Court regarding digital assets. If you apply it here without the secondary waiver of liability, you are essentially admitting that your client committed willful corporate espionage. So, my question to you, on behalf of the court, is, how exactly do you reconcile that fatal contradiction? Dead silence. Complete, suffocating, absolute silence. Richard's brain was short-circuiting. He had no idea what she was talking about. He didn't know who Vance was. He didn't know the Supreme Court ruling. And he certainly didn't know what the hell was on page 42. Well, Richard stammered, his voice suddenly sounding very small and terribly weak. He nervously adjusted his silk tie. Your Honor, the synergy of the statutes in question. It provides a robust shield against the plaintiff's core allegations. Judge Hawthorne leaned forward, resting his chin on his hands, his eyes narrowing into a dangerous glare. Mr. Sterling, the court did not ask for a word salad of corporate buzzwords. My clerk asked you a direct, foundational question about the legal mechanics of your own brief. Answer it. A drop of cold sweat rolled down the side of Richard's face. He frantically flipped open his copy of the brief, his hands shaking so violently that he actually tore the corner of page 41. He stared at the dense paragraphs of complex legal analysis, the words blurring together before his eyes. He was a man drowning in an ocean of his own arrogance. Sitting in the front row of the gallery, the billionaire tech client leaned forward. Billionaires do not get to where they are by being stupid. And this man could smell blood in the water. He watched his highly paid, extremely arrogant lawyer, sweating, shaking, and stuttering helplessly over a document he supposedly spent weeks writing. The client realized instantly what had happened. He turned to his chief operating officer, whispered furiously for 2 seconds, and then did something that completely shattered courtroom protocol. The billionaire stood up. Your Honor, forgive the interruption. The client's voice boomed, dripping with absolute disgust. Richard spun around, his eyes wide with sheer panic. Wait, please. Just give me a second to consult my notes. The billionaire didn't even look at him. He looked directly at the judge. I am paying this man a retainer of $800,000 to protect my company, and it is painfully obvious to everyone in this room that he has not read a single page of the defense he is submitting. The billionaire finally turned his head and looked at Richard with a gaze so cold it could freeze boiling water. You are a complete fraud. You are fired, Effective this exact second. My legal team will be filing a malpractice lawsuit against you and your firm before the sun goes down today. Richard felt the floor drop out from underneath him. Please, let's just discuss this outside, Richard begged, practically whining, completely stripped of his pride and dignity. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, Judge Hawthorne roared, slamming his gavel down so hard the sound cracked like a gunshot. The entire courtroom flinched. This court will not tolerate deception, perjury, or the abhorrent theft of intellectual property by officers of the court. Judge Hawthorne turned to Elena. Madam Clerk, could you please verify the digital metadata of the electronic file submitted to the court's server this morning? Elena didn't even need to look at her computer screen. She already had the printout sitting right next to her. Yes, Your Honor. The document properties show the original file was created on Tuesday at 3:14 in the morning. The sole author registered in the document's DNA is Elena VR. The file was simply duplicated, and the title page was altered yesterday afternoon from Mr. Sterling's IP address. The collective gasp that rippled through the gallery was audible. Junior associates from Richard's own firm covered their mouths in shock. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones, already drafting the headlines that would destroy the law firm's reputation by noon. Richard collapsed into his leather chair, his face buried in his trembling hands. His career, his reputation, his partnership, and his entire arrogant identity were completely vaporized in less than 10 minutes. Mr. Sterling, Judge Hawthorne said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. Your brief is stricken from the record. I am holding you in contempt of court for attempting to perpetrate a fraud upon the federal judiciary. Furthermore, I am drafting an immediate recommendation to the State Bar Association that you be permanently disbarred and stripped of your license to practice law. The gavel slammed down one final time. We are adjourned. As the courtroom erupted into chaos, with the clients storming out and reporters rushing the aisles, Elena slowly gathered her files. She stepped down from the elevated bench and walked past the defense table. Richard was still sitting there, a pathetic, broken shell of a man, staring blankly at the floor. He had told her that the only thing she was qualified to write was a receipt for a burrito. He had told her to go back to the slums. Elena didn't say a single word to him. She didn't need to. She simply walked past him, the sharp click of her heels echoing as a final, definitive victory march, leaving him to suffocate in the ruins of his own making. Now, let me ask you a very real, very raw question. If you were Elena, standing in that courtroom, watching the arrogant man who stole your work and humiliated you now weeping over his completely shattered career, what would you do? Would you feel a shred of sympathy and maybe ask the judge for leniency? Or would you smile and watch the legal system grind him into absolute dust? Be honest with yourself and drop your decision in the comments right now. I want to read every single one. And if you believe that the truth always finds a way to speak, and that karma never, ever misses a target, hit that subscribe button right now to join our community. Stay strong. Never let anyone steal your light. And I will see you in the next story.